This video is sponsored by PCBWay.
Seth Schaefer with Division.
Hey there, this is Seth Schaefer from Team Just Cause Robotics, and in today's video I'll be going over how my 3-pound bots Division and Shrapnel Mine performed in the latest Labor Day Disarray event on September 3rd. They competed in the 3-pound weight class, and while they had the potential of potentially fighting each other, with only 9 robots total in the weight class, that didn't happen. Division, as I showed at the beginning of this clip, obviously performed quite well, getting 2nd place overall, while Shrapnel Mine struggled a bit, and I'll be starting out with this video focusing mainly on Shrapnel Mine, what went wrong, and what I can do to improve it in the future. First off though, now if you're looking at the field, as you can see here, a lot of these bots either have competed at Norwalk Havoc tournaments before, or at least their builders have with other robots, or else they just competed in the most recent September event, which as of this filming happened yesterday. You'll notice Caldera, one of the perennially high-ranked bots and built by Brian Boxall, who just brought Eruption to a Golden Dumpster victory at the most recent Norwalk event before the one that happened yesterday. Then you've got Revolver, built by the same builder as Vertigo, who's competed at Norwalk a number of times. You have Left Unsupervised, built by a team member of the Hijinks BattleBot team, which just competed at the September event as its first Norwalk event. Power Surge is a fingertech beater bar that has competed at Norwalk before, at least under different names or various versions of it with the same builder captaining it. And then Triton and Redbomba are the only two on this list who have not competed at a Norwalk event as of this filming. Shrapnel Mine, of course, is the 3rd robot that hasn't competed at a Norwalk tournament before, because I thought that it might get destroyed and wouldn't be able to survive the rigors of combat there. And I think it still needs a little bit more work before I bring it, though I do hope to someday. My first fight of the entire event was with Shrapnel Mine against Caldera, the robot favored to win the entire tournament. This one I knew was probably going to be really rough for me, because Caldera just does not quit. Its weapon reliability had been having some issues previously, but its drivetrain was really durable, and I didn't think that there was going to be an easy way for me to really damage it with Shrapnel Mine's weapon. So I was just going to have to hope that the wedge would hold up and I could tank some hits, and hope that the wheels would stay attached too. Let's see what happened.
3, 2, 1, fight! We have some box section from Shrapnel Mine. A wheel ripped off of him as Caldera made a start to that. One wheel gone as Caldera hits the arena. As the swing gets hit. More sparks going as top down. What a showing. We have some box section from a wheel ripped off of them as Caldera made sparks to them. One wheel gone as Caldera hits the arena. We have as the swing gets hit. More sparks going as top down.
I just, after the Caldera fight, I had this polypropylene drive mount completely ripped in half and the motor torn into on this side, so that didn't last as long as I would have liked. But you can see it didn't break cleanly along layer lines, so that means that the print wasn't necessarily bad. It was just so much force that, yeah. I've never really had a horizontal hit the wheels before, and clearly that's what can happen. And he also nicked my drive gears back here, so I kind of lost drive on both sides when this was like that, and then I couldn't drive this wheel anymore. This motor seems fine though, and everything else is mostly intact. You can see the chunk he took out of my wedge is actually not as bad as I would have thought. So all things considered, I think that's a pretty successful experiment, but obviously it could have gone a lot better. This was on from Caldera. Yeah, this was like right here. It hit right, that's probably why it ripped off. It delivered the force to this steel piece that had to bend in, so it just shoved like every screw out at once. It hit really deep.
I had a picture-perfect box rush starting off this fight, but of course I made a terrible driving mistake immediately afterwards, exposing my wheel instead of getting the wedge into Caldera's weapon, and it was just completely downhill from there. It was unrecoverable, and once I saw I'd lost drive on my other side, I tapped out. So after that first fight, Shrapnel Mine was a bit worse for wear, but I was able to get it repaired and ready to go for its next fight, which was going to be up against Crashfest. Crashfest is the May Norwalk Havoc champion from this year, and while it doesn't have a damaging weapon, it is an extremely well-driven control bot. So I knew that this was going to be a difficult fight for Shrapnel Mine, which is also kind of a control bot. I did, however, make one fatal mistake preparing for this fight, though I don't think that it was necessarily the difference between winning and losing it. I really just found yet another design flaw, which was going to bite me in the butt.
Riders, 3, 2, 1, fight! We do have some aggressive contact control in the arena. Shrapnel Mine trying to avoid contact with Crashfest. Crashfest using that trigger. In contact as their opponent loses the tire. Lost a tire. Don't believe I have a tire without a tire, folks. As they're knocking in the corner box, once again, Crashfest showing off some really good control. There's a really brand going on. That's his own weapon. And it's just like the other tire of Shrapnel Mine is knocked off. And that weapon of Shrapnel Mine is in contact with the arena floor. We may see some more blocks on the floor. There's a Shrapnel Mine going on. He's trying to put their part in the corner. They are trying to get through. So that was close contact. They might have to stop. Just in this match, there's still 2 minutes more to go. It's still anyone's game. Crashfest showing us incredible aggression, trying to still put it on their toes. They just look. Spark. Ooh, that was a vicious Crashfest keeps us home. Keeps us Shrapnel Mine up on the corner. Trying to drive a motorcycle with but still be pushed around the box by Crashfest. Minute on the go. Crashfest still showing incredible amounts of control in this match as Crashfest is in the corner yet again. Trying to push and fire forward as Crashfest. Motor control for one just under an inch wheel on this match in Crashfest is still absolutely flipping here all over. Shrapnel Mine is still being turned shrapnel, shredded by their own weapon and controlled by their opponent. 40 seconds to go. I know it's running out a little bit. There is fire. There are tires and there is now it's getting back in the second. 30 seconds to go, and there's still sparks flying. One spinner weapon as the flipper of Crashfest is still being used against Shrapnel Mine successfully. Shrapnel Mine hit again and again. Spark on spark as they fall at the end of that arena. 30 seconds to this match. We're going to go the whole distance. This will go to a judging decision. Let's see if I can get to the last second hit. And weigh their decisions in. 3, 2, 1, and that is your match!
Now, in my first fight with Shrapnel Mine, the wheels getting completely knocked off by Caldera was a somewhat predictable failure mode. The tires coming off in this fight was not, but I have a good idea of why this happened. The wheel hubs on Shrapnel Mine and the wheel hubs on Division, just like the rest of the drivetrain on Shrapnel Mine Division, are similar but not identical. While I was originally experimenting with this whole brushless motor coupled to a 3D printed mount with a shoulder bolt drive axle thing on Shrapnel Mine back in November of 2021, I then used that design for the drivetrain on Division version 3 starting in 2022. It had been working very well for me, and I had made a few more iterations on it for Division, but I forgot to translate some of those iterations over back to Shrapnel Mine when I prepared it for this event, and I was really low on time, kind of rushing to get the bot ready. One of those improvements was to the wheel hubs. There was actually supposed to be a little bit of an extra ring of material that is kind of a cutaway to the hub, allowing the airplane to adhere better to the hubs and prevent it from slipping off like you see here. The other thing was that I forgot that on Division I run a 60% throttle limit on the drive, whereas with Shrapnel Mine I ran at 100%. So I think that basically with the tire being adhered less and the wheels spinning almost twice as fast, just the centripetal force of the wheels being up in the air and spinning up to full speed was able to rip the tires off, despite the fact that whenever the wheels were planted on the ground like they were all the time that I was testing this bot, that never happened once. Pretty unfortunate, but it's just one of those things that happens when a bot is in the arena. Now, the fatal mistake that I mentioned before you'll see coming into play shortly, but in my first fight, Shrapnel Mine had a piece of bookbinding tape over the top of it to keep the speed controllers and whatnot inside of it and prevent them from getting hacked apart by the saw blade. Now, the saw blade doesn't go directly into them, but the arm pivots just above those, and since the saw is sticking further down the arm, it only hits the steel guard I put over the battery. However, the drive speed controller on the right side was able to basically work its way loose due to all of the flipping and turning and bashing that Shrapnel Mine was experiencing, and because that tape wasn't there, it ended up coming out so far that the weapon blade was able to actually snag it and rip it out of my robot. So I was down a drive side and had no tires. You'll notice that Shrapnel Mine is still occasionally able to kind of sort of move, which is shocking because the only thing that it is driving on is actually the carbon fiber nylon 3D printed gears that are supposed to drive the wheels when the tires are actually attached to them. So, yeah. Pretty upsetting and stupid loss. Today's video is sponsored by PCBWay. PCBWay offers CNC fabrication, 3D printing, and PCB fabrication, and they are the provider of this part, which makes the weapon system on Shrapnel Mine robust and easy to build. This is a 5-axis CNC machined 7075 aluminum piece, and it would be technically possible to 3D print, but there's no way it would survive the rigors of combat. And today I want to show you exactly how this is used in the robot and how this incredibly complicated looking part makes it so that I can assemble my weapon system in the simplest way possible using only 8 screws. Now, in combat, one of the goals is to make your bot easily repairable in a quick amount of time, and you also generally want to try and minimize the number of spare parts that you need. At the very least, trying to minimize the number of unique spare parts you need. That is what informed the design of this piece. Now, you'll notice there are some countersunk holes on this side, and there is a pocket on this side. That's because I wanted to make it so that these arms could doubly function on either side of the weapon stack up, with one side accepting a bearing, and the other side accepting the weapon motor. You'll notice on the actual robot, this is what the weapon looks like fully assembled, attached to the servo. So the servo itself has 2 metal wheels, one on each side, that have 4 screws that go into these 4 mounting points. I'm not going to show you doing that because it'll take a little while, but just for some better context, And then the motor is situated coupled to one upright, and then the bearing seats in the other upright supporting the other end of the motor shaft, so that when this thing delivers a hit, it doesn't just bend completely and destroy itself. So now let me walk through the assembly process for one of these weapon setups for Shrapnel Mine. First things first, I am going to couple the motor to this upright. So I need these M3 by 16mm screws and a T10 Torx bit. Get these a little bit more, there we go. Alright, so now weapon spins nice and free. If I get the bearing on this side, it should still spin nice and freely. So now I just have to couple this onto the actual arm mount itself. For that, I end up using some deck screws that I got from Home Depot just because they are also a Torx head screw that's a bit bigger, and they were much cheaper than what I could find on McMaster for that size of screw. So those are right here. And I just use 4 of these. So instead of just relying on the strength of the plastic, I'm kind of relying on the strength of the steel screw in the shear direction at least. Just gotta swap out for the T20 Torx now. And there you have it. This has a little bit of give to it, but not so much that it's going to be a problem. I can tighten this up a little bit, but the amount of flex that these 3D printed polypropylene arms give seems to help with taking impacts without destroying the motor, since the motor's bearings aren't necessarily the most incredibly beefy bearings that you would see in most combat robot weapons in the 3-pound class. They do seem to hold up pretty well though. What worked, what didn't, what improvements am I going to make? I'm not abandoning this design. I think that Shrapnel Mine does have promise, and I think it can work quite well. There were a number of changes that I made to this robot. If you want more details on all of those between the last time it fought all the way back in November of 2021 and this event, check out my design overview video that I released a few weeks ago. But quick version, the drivetrain I kind of changed to be a little bit more like Division's. At least I 3D printed these drive mounts in polypropylene rather than in the material they were printed in before, and I added the same axle securing method that I do on Division now. But I forgot to change the hubs, like I said, and that was a mistake. I'm probably going to redesign the hubs for both Division and Shrapnel Mine to get a bunch of improvements that seem to work really well for other people who are casting their wheels. Especially got some help from Madeline from Left Unsupervised. She actually lent me one of her wheels so I can see exactly how the hub design was constructed and get better interlocking urethane grabbing features onto my future hubs. I changed all the drive motors over to the same drive motor, and the weapon motor to the same motors that I use on the drive on Division, and those worked really well because that allowed me to run the battery at 4S, and then I went to a much bigger 4S battery versus the 2S battery I ran back in November. Those improvements worked amazingly. I didn't run out of battery during a 3-minute fight, even with the weapon going almost the whole time and constantly stalling out against the floor, which is one of the worst things that it could have been doing, really. The arm servo has still never died, and I never had problems with that. I was testing out using a 9-volt BEC in here that I got from Palm Beach Bots. That never failed, that worked great. New arm links and linkage to attach the wedge seemed to work quite well. I was a little worried about like 3 different things potentially going wrong with the wedge when it fought Caldera. Either the wedge being ripped off entirely, which didn't happen, the wedge shattering, which also didn't happen, or the wedge being so soft that it would just bend horribly. I do think it was probably a bit on the soft side. I got 4130 because I didn't think that I would have time to bend a titanium wedge that's this big, since it was really hard just to bend the titanium base plate on this bot. And I figured a 1mm thick would probably bend easily, but it would probably not hold up. And the 16th inch or 1.6mm thick I use on the base plate with such a large, long bend line, I was afraid it would just try and bend on the path of least resistance like here instead of bending all the way along here, and I'd need a more complicated bending setup I didn't know how to make. So I just kind of didn't want to bother with that. But in the future, I'll probably try and figure out a way to get this wedge to be titanium. Even though the bot is still pretty underweight and I don't need the weight for it, I think it would just work a lot better in titanium. All of the machined parts that PCBWay provided for me worked great. They worked great in November, so no changes there. The new polypropylene weapon arms seem to work well, and this weapon system seems to work pretty well, but it hasn't really delivered or taken a huge hit directly from another weapon yet, so maybe that would change in the future. I definitely need to add like an actual like bolt-on top plate, so I'll have to add some way to mount that to the side armor features here. And yeah, mainly the main change for this is just going to be experimenting with getting the drive to be, you know, able to take a hit and from a horizontal spinner, and also make sure that the tires stay on. So most of the improvements that I made actually worked really, really well. Like this whole wedge setup did its job pretty well, and I'm fairly happy with the fact that all of the experimental stuff that I did for the most part worked out. I don't think that I really, you know, took 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because this hub design issue was going to have been an issue with the past version of the Spot too. It just didn't come to bear because at the time I was using a different urethane tire compound, and now I'm using a softer one that was able to peel away. So that was just kind of an unfortunate happenstance for what happened in that one fight. So yeah, lots of changes to make to this guy to make it not suck, but I have a clear path forward and I'm excited to see where it goes. Alright, that's pretty much all I've got for you today. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you want to see my recap for Division's run that landed at 2nd place and the Most Destructive Robot Award at this competition. I hope to get that out in the next 2 weeks, but can't promise a specific date yet, because there's lots of BattleBots prep happening for Bloodsport. Make sure to check out the Bloodsport YouTube channel, which is linked in the description below as well, for some updates on that. I'm going to be shooting and editing and posting videos for the Bloodsport in the coming few weeks as we prepare for Season 7 of BattleBots. So yeah, make sure to like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and as always, thanks for watching.